Hi everyone, my name is Mark Walker, welcome back to SwitchUp, and it is time. Tears of the Kingdom is finally here. I can't believe I'm saying it. And Nintendo pulled it out the bag with a clutch patch release just before it came out. We're going to go over frame rates, look at both docked and handheld performance, as well as a few key observations that I've noticed. Now hopefully you enjoy this type of video, but what you don't enjoy is your experience being spoiled. Now, while I won't speak about any of the game's mechanics, it's undoubtable that even if you're just watching a video about Zelda, there's some things you may see that you didn't know about. With all of that said though, how is the performance in this new version, and why do I think you're going to be experiencing tears of joy? Well, let's find out. Let's jump in at the deep end then. As you probably saw from some of the preview builds, the game was running terribly. Nintendo have launched a patch and performance is significantly improved, but there are some things to note. While it maintains 30 FPS locked out, and this is significant because when I say locked out, I mean the frame pacing is actually very good, so it feels the way it should. Due to the nature of the VSync they're using here, when the frame rate does drop, it will drop in increments of around 5 FPS. So you'll see it drop from 30 down to 25 and 25 down to 20. The main culprit of these frame rate drops appears to be your ultra hand, or your ultra lag hand as I like to call it. This ability will cause frame rates to tank down, but I think the key thing here and the main takeaway is that, as I said, 90% of your playtime is going to be experienced with a very smooth frame rate, and that goes for both docked and handheld modes. When we jump over to handheld, it's such a pleasure to move around this environment. I'm not entirely sure what Nintendo can do to improve those frame rates any further. It's a borderline miracle that it runs the way it does, but with certain effects on screen and larger battles, you will undoubtedly see some drops. Visual quality is significantly better, in my opinion, than the first game. And by first game, I mean Breath of the Wild. There are a few things that affect this. Firstly, dynamic lights seem to be much better than they were before. These are positional. It means that if someone's carrying a torch near your character, you'll see that glow relative to your position. It might sound like a small thing, but it makes these underground areas much more atmospheric. This is combined with some decent shadows. I say decent because with FSR, which we're going to talk about next, there's only so much it can do with limited data. Now, FSR was the big introduction, and what this is doing is essentially upscaling the image using some real jiggery pokery. The end result is that many of the images you'll see are actually native, or native on paper. For my personal experience, it meant that the image looked crisper, it looks sharper. The engine still seems to avoid anti-aliasing, at least post-processed, so there's basically no anti-aliasing from what I can see. The edges of objects will look slightly jaggy, but I'll take that in exchange for a crisper picture, which is exactly what you'll get. And as I'm sure Nintendo are more than aware, loads of us will be playing this in handheld, tucked up in bed, and the last thing we care about are, well, slight jaggies on the edge of objects. We're really focused on that frame rate and the overall image quality. Another important aspect are the options that you're given as the player. Now, as hoped, you'll get your Pro Mode HUD, so if you'd rather not have any of the on-screen elements and just have that perfect picture, stripping away any other distractions, then you can choose that. You can tweak the sensitivities, but not as much as I would like. You simply have low, medium and high for those analog stick speeds, with high still feeling a little bit slow. Yes, there's gyro here, and it is a solid implementation, perhaps slightly refined from the first game. There are some tweaks that you can do to improve your experience, like being able to swap the buttons for jump, which might sound strange, but actually I do that straight away. So with that patch then, I'm pleased to say that anyone picking this up on launch day is going to get the experience that Nintendo intended. Does it show the life of the Switch? Well, absolutely yes it does, but as far as I'm concerned, it's a technical masterpiece, and I don't say that lightly. Draw distances are incredibly far for the power of this hardware. Those real-time lights are impressive. Yep, the drops are noticeable, but for it to even maintain this frame rate and visual quality for the amount of time it does, I'm quite frankly blown away. Now, controller input latency, despite the game using VSync, are very responsive. This is particularly notable when using gyro controls. I wish Nintendo would give other developers whatever method it is they're using, because it's much better, and it also eradicates a lot of the unnecessary shake you may normally experience. Load times when entering and exiting dungeons, and I won't talk about them, but I'll just talk about load times, well, they're significantly faster. One load time actually counted 5 seconds. The other was around 8, and either way, these are impressive, especially when you consider the amount of information that needs to be loaded when moving from interior to exterior locations. Tears of the Kingdom has full 5.1 surround sound, and audio quality is outstanding. As before, some lines are spoken and some aren't, and here's an interesting thing. You can actually select to change the voice to any of the available regions. So you can have that spoken language in English, French, German, Japanese, whatever tickles your fancy. Just a small thing, but something that's nice to see, particularly when the whole thing squeezes into 16 gigabytes. I will give you my initial thoughts on the experience, but I will try and avoid any spoilers whatsoever. So here we go. I'd gone into Breath of the Wild not expecting much and coming out with probably one of my favourite experiences of all time in terms of open world adventures. The weight of expectation then on Tears of the Kingdom was almost insurmountable, and it still surprises me that Nintendo have managed to create something which actually feels fresh. Now sure, I intentionally have avoided Breath of the Wild for quite a significant amount of time, and things like sounds, some of the ambient music, and of course some of the visual quality is very reminiscent to Breath of the Wild. But with all of that said, there's that moment, isn't there, at the start of Breath of the Wild where you leave the cave and enter the world for the first time, and I was thinking, how are they going to recreate that type of feeling? And they have. Now, having these new areas and biomes adds significantly more to the experience than I thought it would. It just feels different, but with a familiarity that manages to stay away from being overly familiar. There are so many new mechanics in here. For the first 4 or 5 hours, you'll literally just be learning new things constantly and then being taught in an accessible and fun way how to use them. Glen and I will do a full review of Tears of the Kingdom, but we're really not keen on rushing through it and giving you a score. For us, this is like once in a generation style game that we just don't want to do that with. A bit like Xenoblade Chronicles 3, I know it became a bit of a meme on the channel that we didn't do a review of it, but we just didn't want to rush through it. There is a chance that I'm just going to play this non-stop now until next week, so I mean, I might rush through it unintentionally and then we can give you a score. But yeah, don't expect a review scored in the traditional SwitchUp sense, but if it comes, it means that this game really is that good that I couldn't put it down. And for sure, that's my initial impression. Let me know in the comments, are you excited for this one? I do hope I haven't spoiled anything, and if you enjoy the content, then consider sticking around. Big thanks to our Patreons and our members and all of you that enjoy the content, and as always, for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys, see ya!